minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A whole hour without sort of conventional calls, which means historically it's always slightly hard to get the wheels turning again at the beginning of this hour. So take that as an incentive if you've been toying with the idea of making your debut on the programme, but put off by the engaged tone or just a sort of general reluctance, then this would probably be quite a good time to break your duck. But let me tell you what we're talking about first. I've got this real problem, as you know, with how to do this, because the temptation to do smug I told you so is tiny, because the point about Brexit, those of us that warned how silly it was to do it, we're not just warning out of an altruistic sense of social responsibility, we're warning because it was going to hurt us as well. So, you know, how much celebration can you do about the fact that the Chief Executive of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs told MPs last week that British businesses are going to spend £7.5 billion a year handling customs declarations that they didn't have to do when we were in the European Union. £7.5 billion a year. This is the head of the tax office essentially confirming that it's as damaging as a no-deal situation. It's not materially different from a no-deal situation. It's hard to pick a highlight, isn't it, or a winner of all the witless contributions to public discourse from the last few years. But Let's Go WTO was probably the most boneheaded of all the boneheaded slogans. If you might as well have had "I understand nothing" tattooed across your forehead if you were subscribing to that ludicrous slogan. So, but that hurts every business. That hurts businesses that were desperate. Businesses run by or staffed by people that are desperate not to leave the European Union. It hurts ambivalent business people. It hurts people who thought that Brexit was going to be a good idea. Everyone gets hurt. So this notion of there being some sort of smug celebration or schadenfreude is just another lie in the lengthy litany of lies told by people that have turned us into the first country in the history of humanity to impose economic sanctions on ourselves. £7.5 billion a year. That's more money than Johnson is freeing up this year for the NHS as a stopgap before they come up with a way of funding social care. That's £5.5 billion. That gets all the headlines. This, it was in the Times on Friday, but I don't think it necessarily resonated with you. They don't get shouted from the rooftops because so much of the media encouraged you to vote for this madness. So that's just one little story for you. £7.5 billion a year of unnecessary costs, customs declarations. I suppose if you work in the sector, if you make red tape, then business is booming. You know, it's a bit like being an undertaker during a plague. You sort of get, there are always some sectors of an economy that benefit from things that are terrible for the whole of society. But there it is. So that's not me or Anna Soubry. That's Jim Harrow, the Chief Executive of HM Revenues and Customs, telling MPs that the number of customs forms now needed to trade with the European Union under the deal as negotiated, you remember that, is not, and I quote, materially different from a no-deal situation. So Lord Frost got a peerage. Well, what for? You tell me. No? No takers on that? All right. But that's not what we're talking about. That's just a little bit of my sad job of telling you stories that if we lived in a remotely honest media, you'd be hearing everywhere. But you have to tune into me, you poor things, to get the actual facts these days. So that's £7.5 billion a year, absolutely unnecessary on red tape. And of course, lots and lots of people thought they were voting to reduce red tape. The story I'm more interested in, and that's why I got that one out of the way early, so that I can sort of vent my spleen on the silliness of the situation that we're in, and look instead at what we're all going to have to do, which is make the best of a very bad lot. Whether you're prepared to admit yet that it is a very bad lot and you shouldn't have voted for it or not doesn't matter. It is a bad lot. A shortage of labour is bad news, OK? A perfect storm from Brexit and the pandemic has left businesses battling shortages of lorry drivers, waiters, chefs and construction workers. That's the CBI talking. You know that there are tens of thousands of shortages in other sectors as well. Social care, the NHS, everywhere you go there are shortages. But the CBI has focused upon these particular sectors in its latest warning. The General Secretary, the Director General, Tony Danker, warned that this acute skills shortages will extend into yet more industry and may not resolve themselves until 2023. So at risk of sounding a little bit pedantic, what's the difference between a skills shortage and a labour shortage? Because I've always felt this country has a problem with the service sector. I don't know why it is. Who was I talking to the other day? He was absolutely fascinating on it being a peculiarly English condition, a post-Victorian condition. It was a Greek pal of mine, a Cypriot pal of mine, I beg your pardon, and wondering why Cypriots in particular were very well represented in the hospitality trade, as well, whether they were running fish and chip shops or or restaurants, other sorts of restaurants. The English don't do it. Have a think about that. That's why there's not really such a thing as an English restaurant. You know? I mean, they exist, but they're not. There's not something like a French restaurant, a Spanish restaurant, an Italian restaurant. What would be an English restaurant? A steakhouse, I suppose, but that's as American as it is English. And his theory, which I thought was fascinating, and remind me to tell you about curry houses. Have I told you this before? I think this is so interesting. I love this sort of, what would you call it? Almost a sort of combination of social history and anthropology. But also remind me that this is a phone-in, and so you need to ring in and tell me what's going on with the labour shortages. We don't like serving other people. I don't know why, whether it was getting rid of the aristocracy, no longer being under butlers. So the only places in which you will be served will be either staffed and run by people who've come from overseas, or there'll be a weird deference in place. So the cab driver sits up front behind a screen. In other countries, you slip into the front seat as easily as you like, but you're not equal. It's a weird one. I'll explain it better on another occasion. But when the Bangladeshi immigrants started opening restaurants, so they would begun by having trucks outside pubs selling samosas and bhajis, and curry became quite popular, and then a few of them decided to open their own restaurants. There was no model to base on. Think about it. So you're Bangladeshi or Indian, you want to open a restaurant to appeal to English people, you will go, well, let's go to an English restaurant, find out what they do. There is no such thing as an English restaurant, which is why that goodness gracious me famous sketch was so funny and so effective. So what did they do? Where do you get catered to in England? You go to a pub. So why do all Indian restaurants have velvet seat in the olden days, velvet seating, tablecloths, kind of chandelier-y type? They look like saloon bars. And even though no one ever goes up to it, most Indian restaurants still, and I know there are some funky modern ones now, but they still have a little bar at the back with a bloke standing behind it. And that is because they had nothing to model it on except pubs. So they basically built what is a tribute act to a pub in order to sell curry to people. It was Johnny Vaughan that was explaining this to me. It was there you go. It wasn't a Greek bloke at all. Where did I get that from? Johnny's an absolute fountain of knowledge and fascinating insights. He's one of the most interesting people I know, actually. And we had lunch not long ago, and he was. If I say I barely got a word in edgeways, you'll get an indication of just how agog I was listening to him. And he'd had that explained to him by one of the patriarchs of one of the big first Indian restaurant opening families. But I digress. Skills shortages is what they're talking about. And the sectors that have been mentioned, as I said, are lorry drivers, waiters, chefs and construction workers. How will this be fixed? 0345 6060 973. Because who is going to be tempted into working who is not working now? That's a valid question, right? If you're not working now, if you're retired or you're thinking of coming back into the workforce, it's the quality of the offer, right? You think, do you know what? I might do another 5 years because then I could buy that place in... Oh, no, you can't buy that place in Benidorm because, of course, we've abolished freedom of movement. But you take my point. You could enhance the quality of your retirement much, much more so. 53 grand, I think I saw one lorry driver, Waitrose drivers, was it, being offered that? But what were you doing before? That's what I want to talk about. So shortages in general. What's the difference between a labour shortage and a skills shortage? And what do you think we've got? Because the CBI are talking about a skills shortage. There's clearly a little bit of both at play here. But if there's 100,000 lorry drivers short, so 100,000 people 2 years from now have trained up, qualified and become lorry drivers. What happens to the 100,000 jobs that they were doing before? 0345 6060 973. The answer used to be obvious. We are part of a community of 600 million people, and we enjoy full freedom of movement of labour, so wherever the gaps are, people will migrate towards them. When there were gaps in the construction industry in Germany in the 1980s, lots of English chippies and plasterers and builders and bricklayers went over to Germany. There were so many of them, they made a sitcom out of it. Auf Wiedersehen Pet, for younger listeners. So that's how, the bigger the market and the more mobile the workforce, the easier it is to fix labour shortages, isn't it? So what's going to happen to us now that our workforce is essentially the same size as our population? 0345 6060 973, and we've got shortages in pretty much every corner of it. I haven't even got the Wagamama story. I'm quite fond of Wagamama. I like a chili chicken ramen when the occasion takes, particularly if I've got a hangover. Actually, I find a chili chicken ramen really hits the spot, gets the sweat glands working, and you manage to get some of the toxins out of your system. Is that too much information? OK, sorry. Well, anyway, there's a shortage of waiters there. The number of restaurants that can't open fully. Everywhere you go, there's a shortage of people. So what's the difference between a shortage of skills and a shortage of people? And how are we going to fix this? 0345 6060 973. I'll take the personal, but I'll take the political as well. I'll take the subjective, but I also want the objective, the overview, because I can't see a way out of this problem unless we somehow rediscover elements of where we were under freedom of movement. There's no way they can reverse it or rescind it, because it's still a bit of a totem pole for them, despite being part of the process of becoming the first country in the history of humanity to impose economic sanctions on itself. So what's going on? Bosses in particular, you tell me. You have a shortage of skilled workers. How do you think it will be fixed? How can you fix it? 0345 6060 973. And workers, how are you going to make it? I mean, are you thinking about it? You're doing something now, and you're looking at opportunities here and there. Stop nodding, Keith. You've got the dream job here. They'll be queuing around the block if you were to go and drive a lorry for Waitrose. I'll tell you that for nothing. But what would happen to the job you're doing? Do you see what I mean? I don't need to over-explain it. It's pretty straightforward. I am genuinely befuddled by what the next chapter is going to look like. And as ever, there is no pleasure in saying we bloody warned you about this. The question now is not, oh, how right was I on a scale of 1 to 10? The question now is, how can we undo this damage that was done as a result of people like me being ignored? It's 20 minutes after 12, and a little bit of the riddle solved itself during the break. You can have a skills shortage and a labour shortage. You can fix the skills shortage but still have a labour shortage. So if you are currently unskilled and there are shortages in skilled areas, CBI warning that this can't be fixed for 2 years. They represent 190,000 companies. They're looking chiefly at the moment at lorry drivers, waiters, chefs and construction workers, but I can tell from my switchboard that is the tip of the iceberg. So if you're currently unskilled and you skill up and go off and do that job, that doesn't fix a labour shortage, because the job you were doing before is now empty. 20 minutes after 12. We'll just have a general chat about this, OK? And as I say, we are all in it together now, regardless of whether you're responsible for it or not with your vote in 2016. It doesn't matter. Yeah, we're on the same team now. We need to try to fix it. I don't even care whether or not you want to pretend it's nothing to do with Brexit. As long as you acknowledge there's a problem, we need to work together to fix it. Adam is in Bletchley. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. We spoke before and all that. Yes, hello. How are you?
Very well indeed. What can you tell me?
Hi, I work in a fresh food warehouse, and everyone is talking about the lorry driver shortages at the moment, and it's a very fair point to take.
Of course.
However, we need to realise that behind every lorry driver, which is a very highly skilled job, is someone who fill the lorries with produce. Yes. Behind that person is someone who has to pick that produce into cages. Behind those people, there's someone who has to receive the goods into the warehouse, and so on and so forth. So, lorry drivers is just the tip of the iceberg, really. So, if there was an article, I think, in one of the newspapers saying that 100,000 pigs will have to be destroyed because there's not enough butchers to process them.
Yeah, that was. I mean, that was astonishingly, that got considerably less coverage than the tale of one alpaca.
And on top of that, and every step of the way, it's people, lorry drivers, admin, cleaners, someone who has to manually handle the food, the produce, etc., etc.
How bad is it at the moment in your warehouse?
I mean, I'm in the middle of doing a 13 days straight basically. I don't have to, but there is easy money to be made.
Yeah,
So
fair enough.
I'm working overtimes. Companies are paying bonuses for overtimes, obviously, just to convince people to come to work. Short term, yes, there's easy money to be made. Long term, I don't see any other solution to this rather than rejoining the single market and customs.
Well, we're not going to do that, but we might do sort of baby steps. They might introduce so many exemptions that we might as well have still been in the single market. The question then becomes whether or not the right number of people would take up the invitation, because it's we touched on this, I think, last week. It's a very different invitation to say to someone, come here, but you won't be an equal.
It is, and then you have to also bear in mind that if you're going to be a worker on a short list, right, a lorry driver,
yes,
you can come in and get a visa. Your children, your dependents can come in and get a visa. Your spouse will not, because that spouse of yours may not be on a short workers list.
Yes.
How does that work? And
well, that's what I mean. That's a very different invitation, isn't it, from what was in place up until.
And it is going to be a temporary visa, and these people, well, some of the people left before the pandemic or between the first and second wave before the Brexit. If they came back to wherever they came from and had different jobs, or they found the jobs in the works they used to do before, and they are earning a decent money, and then now have to go abroad to earn this decent money. Yes. Why would they come back?
No, I get that, and I think you've touched on this. So my slightly silly question, although it's a sincere one, it's just silly because I'm not that clever sometimes. If you work with say 100 people and 10 of them go off to train as lorry drivers, where do the 10 replacements come from if you've already got shortages?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's the problem, isn't it?
It's same in hospitality and everywhere else, really.
And I guess we just have to keep talking about it in a calm and friendly fashion, which you can't not be aware of why it's happening, but I guess you don't have to labour the point. Something that other callers can help me with. Adam, take care, mate, and stay safe. Make sure you do, you're overdoing it, but as you say, filling your boots while the sun's out, making hay while the sun shines, but do look after your health as well. But what happens at the end of the month when the worker retention scheme or the furlough comes to an end? So I don't know. I've got precious little experience or association with that whole scheme. So what happens? Is that going to help? End of this month, you're currently on 60% of your normal whack for a job that you can't do because of the pandemic, and this will be the period in which you find out, if you haven't already, that you're not actually going to have a job to go back to. Number of shops that have shut on the high street. It was 50 a day I was reading at the weekend. And that, I think, is slowing down. It's getting better. So what happens when I don't know, and you do. You're living it. You tell me. 0345 6060 973. The story Adam referred to, if you missed it. Leading figures in the livestock industry say that 100,000 pigs face being killed and burned because Home Secretary Priti Patel has failed to include the job on a list of shortage occupations, which would allow foreign butchers to enter the UK on a skilled worker visa. Vets as well, in abattoirs, all sorts. So they might struggle to slaughter them humanely because there's a shortage of vets in the abattoirs to certificate the killing processes in the abattoirs. I mean, it is genuinely ridiculous, but because it's all down to the B word, the conversation is necessarily politicised and either stilted or completely ignored. I've said to you a few times now, if I had encouraged you to vote for Brexit, what on earth would we be talking about on the programme on days like this? I mean, how many tales would we be able to find of a kid being sent home from school for having a dodgy haircut? Or something like that. I just don't know. I mean, if I had encouraged you to vote for this, how long would I get away with not mentioning it, do you think? Yeah. Peter's in Blackburn. Peter, what do you reckon?
I think you're right in what you're saying. I'm a wagon driver, 35 years doing this, and it's got worse and worse and worse. And the problem is the government were told about this years and years and years
long before Brexit, actually, to be fair, not to the government necessarily, but to the facts, is that your industry has been crying out for help and understanding before the referendum was a twinkle in David Cameron's eye.
Yeah, it's true. That's very true. But the problem you've got, we've lost 20,000 wagon drivers. So we're still, if they were still here, we'd still be 80,000 drivers down.
Yes.
I mean, the average age now is 56, 57 when I started. back in the deep, dark 80s, you couldn't get a job. You had to have experience. So, right, and a lot of companies now, lads are passing the test and every credit to them. Anyone wants to do it, crack on.
Sure.
But companies won't take them on. The company I work for won't take them on without 2 years' experience.
I'm hearing that a lot. Now, they're going to have to change their tune, aren't they, shortly, or not?
Well, they say it's down to insurance, but
Is
a lot
it?
of them, if you go through an agency, but even agencies are charging ludicrous amounts of money. I have a planner. We all have a planner.
Yeah.
My planner was telling me a couple of weeks ago, he phoned up for an agency driver, and this is for a driving agency, and they said the bidding starts at £35 an hour
Crikey.
for one man.
Yeah.
So for a 10-hour day, that's 350 quid. That's a lot of money. The driver doesn't get that. The agency get it and obviously pay the driver's wage.
Right, the driver's going to get most of it after the agency's taken a fat slice, but they're still, I mean, that's proper money, isn't it?
Well, that is proper money. You know, it's the industry.
Have you had a rise? Has your hourly rate gone up?
My hourly rate has gone up, yeah.
And yet you're still here. No, I don't want to say you're complaining, Peter, because that makes you sound like you're not complaining. You're describing a bad situation, even though some people, perhaps on the Daily Express, would claim that this is great news. You're a winner. This is evidence that everything's brilliant. But you're actually describing something you don't find desirable, despite the fact that in the short term you benefit from it.
Oh, I mean, it's great having a pay rise.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong.
I'm not.
But what will happen is the rates will have to go up, what the companies charge for delivering the goods.
Yeah.
And then after that, it'll then be passed on to yourselves, the consumer in the shop.
Oh, it's not me I'm worried about. It's never me I'm worried about, Peter. It's people who will struggle to afford those little increases in costs that get passed right down the line.
We all know that people are struggling as it is.
Of course we do.
That's hard to buy. But the other thing I was going to say is,
Yes.
like, we deliver to our DCs, regional distribution centres, and if there's any drivers on here, they'll be laughing now when I say you can wait 5-6 hours to unload. But the reason being they come with short staff.
Well, this is what Adam was saying. Adam said for every lorry driver, you've got someone in the warehouse who's taking it off the shelves. You've got forklift truck drivers, and then you've got the people loading. So when business is good, when times are good, I'll just go back 2 years. How long would you take to unload then? You pull up outside an RDC. How long before you're back on the road?
2-3 hours, perhaps. You don't know. It depends on what
All
company it is.
And now, what's the maximum now? What's the longest you've had to wait?
9 hours.
Shut the front door.
No, I was 9 hours, and that was. I don't want to name companies.
No, fine. But that's just because they haven't got the bodies to unload the lorry.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So what if they all train? The few bodies they have got to unload the lorries, they're going to go off and retrain as drivers. So we're going to be full of. We're going to have trucks up and down the country and nobody to unload them.
Exactly. And the other problem is, you get there and they'll say we've no room because they haven't got the drivers to take them out can't say the word, but to the various big supermarkets, they can't take the stuff out. So it's just one big vicious circle, and it'll never. It's.
What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like then, to coin a motoring analogy?
Probably a pinhole that's been covered over, I would describe it as at the moment.
Drive carefully, Peter. Thank you. And I'm glad, crikey, those of us who campaign for things like living wages and minimum wages, and all the people currently claim, Brexit is wonderful, lorry drivers have had a pay rise. They're the ones that have been telling us for decades we can't afford pay rise. Oh no, businesses will go bust if we have a living wage. Businesses will go bust if you bring in minimum wage legislation. I mean, the hypocrisy of these people. I think they're too thick to realise how hypocritical they are, actually, to be fair. And if you do it for a living, it doesn't matter. You can be so far removed from the facts, as long as you get in the, getting the balloon inflated in the paper every morning, the facts don't matter. But there it is. Lorry driver had a pay rise. You hear in his voice, he's describing a dismal situation. And even if you manage to plug the gap caused by the shortage of lorry drivers, you create other gaps here and there and there. It's like this whack-a-mole is what it's like, except it's endless. What does the end of it look like? I honestly don't know. And it matters for the most obvious and, I would argue, clear of reasons. A couple of phone lines free. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. What will happen at the end of furlough? Listen, I'm not going to hold you to it. If you turn out to be wrong, if your prediction doesn't get borne out by reality, I'm not going to come round your house and demand a refund. What do you think is going to happen at the end of furlough with regard to current labour and or skills shortages? Tim Humphrey is here now with your headlines. 12:36 is the time. Speaking of papers that I now rely upon to insulate myself from any accusations of bias, the Daily Express has this headline. this morning, online at least. I haven't checked the print edition. Brexit : Boris accused of destroying UK fish industry with bigger loss coming. Boris Johnson has been accused of destroying the fishing industry with his Brexit trade deal with the EU. That would be the Brexit trade deal that the head of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs has described as costing businesses £7.5 billion a year in declarations and being materially no different at all from a no-deal Brexit, and the same one which farmers warn could see 100,000 pigs killed, which perhaps explains why that story about an alpaca got so much coverage in the right-wing media while I was on my holiday. What would you rather read about in a newspaper that encouraged you to vote for Brexit? One alpaca facing death for apparently having tuberculosis, or 100,000 pigs facing death because of how you voted in 2006? I don't blame you. Contempt for the conmen, compassion for the conned. Martin's in Exeter. Martin, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Martin.
Going back to, talking about skill shortages in the construction industry. This all started in the early 80s. I mean, I was a trained chippy in the late 70s, done my apprenticeships in guilds, advanced crafts, all of that, along with all brickies, plumbers, electricians, etc. Now, in the early 80s, the government brought in a YTS scheme. This sort of killed off a lot of the apprentices because it was a lot cheaper for companies to have YTS workers.
Right.
Unfortunately, this only trained for a year instead of the 4 years that we all did. So a lot of these people came into the construction industry and no fault of their own. They were trained and they went for it. But obviously, after a while, they couldn't really do the work. And then these companies didn't train people properly. The government, I worked for the government as a council chipping. Yeah. And there's loads of us. For argument's sake, in 1 year at Reading Tech, there would have been, 40 apprentices chippies. That's just 1 year. I doubt if there's 10% of...
Yeah, what was the rationale behind it? Did the YTS massage the unemployment figures?
No, it didn't do that so much. It was just cheaper. You see, going back to the council...
No, but I don't mean for the businesses. I mean for the government. Yeah. Why would the government have done it? Because, it's a bit of a holy grail, apprenticeships, isn't it, when we have conversations like this? What was the rationale for the government, do you think?
OK, right. If you had 40 chippies in anywhere, you had 10 from the government. So it was a big concern for them. It was expensive. But they got their money back because a lot of the chippies, plumbers and electricians carried on working for the council once they got their apprenticeships. So it wasn't as if they left and went self-employed. Self-employed, as you remember, the loads of money thing in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of people went into it there, and a lot of the people that had been trained went into self-employment. And in the end, it dwindled away apprenticeships, because the self-employed people were not trained people, James.
Got you.
Because they haven't, so therefore a lot of the bigger companies didn't bother with apprentices.
So you'd have unskilled labour on a site, but you get yourself a 10-year window, don't you, before retirement and natural wastage creates a shortage at the bottom of the market. So you get 10 years of good times, and then suddenly you wake up one morning and you can't find anybody to work for you, at which point being part of a 600 million person single market kicked in, and we started deriving an awful lot of skilled construction labour from overseas.
Well, that's exactly right. And if you go back to, say, 2005, 2006, I remember reading something that the average age on a building site was 49.
Right.
Well, if you go on now, it's probably going to be well into the 50s.
You think so? Well, I'll see you that. I'll raise you Rick's dad. All right, Rick's dad. Yeah. My 76-year-old dad is still driving a 44-ton articulated lorry. Do you reckon that's safe, James? I don't, and that's his own son.
Well, there you go. And this, once again, I mean, I work now for the biggest roofing manufacturer in Europe. We're in France, and we're importing into the UK. So I could bore you for ages about what's gone on from January the 1st this year. I mean, the costs, the delays. People go on about the delays. People go on about empty shelves. You did talk to the previous caller about costs. Yeah. The costs for us now to import into the UK with customs clearance, freight, forwarding, all that kind of stuff, is putting our prices up by about 11% a year. Now, all that does is goes on, James, like all the other things like bricks, windows, everything else goes on to the person buying the house.
Yeah.
And that's why house prices are already ridiculous now, but they're only going to go one way.
It's like an unsustainable balloon that keeps inflating. How are we going to fix it?
Right, OK. Well, the only way you're going to fix the construction industry is to get back the workers from the EU.
Oh, that's every call.
I'm sorry.
No,
sorry, there is no other way. I said to your nice young lady who took the call, there is no other way. Because it's going to take you at least 10 to 15 years to get 20% of the skilled workers you need in the construction industry. Because obviously some of them will stay, some of them will get into apprenticeship and get fed up and come out of it.
Yes, of course.
So to get that level of skilled workers, just one hospital in Exeter, Nightingale Hospital in Exeter, they had 50 people from Bulgaria working on that. 50 workers from Bulgaria.
And some of them will still be here, but
no, they're not. No, they're not.
They've all
now.
gone.
Well, I don't know, James. I know we like to be factual. I don't know.
We do. We try.
Yeah.
But the point being, of course, that the invitation to come back now, even if we manage to find people prepared to consider it, is very, very different. It's come over here and be a second-class citizen here on sufferance rather than come over here and enjoy all the benefits of our wonderful country.
Well, it's amazing because we've got so much. I mean, you take 200,000 houses, units a year are built in the UK, roughly. And there has been since the year dot.
Okay.
2 reasons for that. 1, products. 2, labour.
Yeah, of course.
So you're not going to be able to build more houses unless you've got more. We're not only servicing France, but the EU would supply roof coverings. Roughly 30% of roof coverings in the UK. That includes natural slate and clay tiles.
Yes.
So that's 1 in 3-ish houses in the UK at this precise moment is being supplied by the EU. Okay.
Gosh.
Right now, and they've all had increases this year.
Of course they have, and it's going to get worse as well potentially.
Well, I mean, you take it. How can we possibly increase our house building, which we need to? If we've got to pay more for products, that means the houses go up. We're not building factories here, which is the main problem. I mean, the incentive to build factories here should be immense.
Well, except it's harder to export now. So, I mean, unless we're building exclusively for the domestic market, which is probably what's going to happen. I think that's probably what's happened with... Is it Toyota? I always get confused. The one in Sunderland is probably just the business model will be to reduce the choice of cars that are available in this country to the cars that are built in this country, because the import-export side of things is on the slide. Here's a text. Here's a text from Paul, who's heard you. Paul's got a very intelligent comment. He says, "Rubbish, rubbish, rubbish, rubbish." Martin.
Okay, great. Anyway, moving on.
Welcome to my world.
Sorry, James, that's ridiculous. But if you take the capacity in the UK is only 70% of roofing, okay? Yes. So we have to import. So either we build factories here or we carry on importing.
So, there's so many areas that you just think something's going to snap and you just wonder what it is. And the alternative is, as you say, and as Adam said, and as everybody said, Peter said, is that they will bring in exemptions. And just sort of do it really quietly until essentially almost every skilled sector has returned to a free movement of labour, with the difference being that if you take advantage of the invitation to come here and work, unless they turn things upside down pretty quickly, you are not going to be as welcome as you were, and if you're not as welcome as you would be in 27 other countries. I suspect we'll talk again, Martin, because you clearly know your stuff, and you clearly have several dogs in this fight. 12:44 is the time. I'll squeeze in Michael before the break. Michael, what would you like to say?
Sorry, James, just something you said earlier about the English don't want to serve.
Yes.
I don't think that's correct. I absolutely loved my job. I worked in a bistro pub.
Well, so did I, mate. Don't get me wrong. I loved working in a shop and I loved being a waiter as well. But I wasn't just talking about you, Michael. I was talking about society in general. And there's a reason why. Yeah. You know, all the maitre d's in the posh restaurants right through to the average barista in a Cafe Nero at this point in our island history are largely foreign.
And the problem is that what I found out very quickly after a couple of years doing this, there was no way I could go and afford to live on my own on the wages I was earning.
Yeah.
There was no way I could get a mortgage. There was no structure for me to go forward except for applying to other companies to try and get the next move up. There's
That's true in most sectors. That's true in most sectors. If you want to get a boost, if you want to get a pay rise, you need to get an offer from somewhere else, or you need to move around. But we don't respect the service sector enough in this country, and we don't. I'll tell you what we don't do, Michael, and I hope you agree with this because I don't want to upset you. We don't see it as a career in the traditional sense. When I spent a lot of time in Greece as a younger man, I had a lot of friends who were going to hospitality school, whether they were going to the fancy one in Switzerland and then they'd come back in the hope of running a 5-star hotel one day, or whether they were just going to go into the family restaurant business. It was a career. It wasn't a stopgap, and it wasn't a last resort or a plan B. I think you'd agree with me that we don't respect it as a career enough in this country, and that is reflected perhaps in the wages.
Absolutely, and the thing we need to do is we need to be getting into the schools now, and all the other things you talked about, butchers, drivers.
Yeah.
hospitality. We need to be selling these as good jobs. Not everybody can be in the media. I've got a 16-year-old. Not everybody can be in the media. Not everybody's going to be.
I wouldn't encourage your 16-year-old into the media. The wages I'm 49, got into it roughly in my mid-20s, and the money is a fraction now of what it was then. And even then it was a fraction of what it was when my dad got his first job in the national media. The problem is there's only a finite number of people, and that's why part of this hour is built upon, let's fill all the shortages in all of the sectors you describe, but what happens either to the jobs that were being done by the people who've changed sector, or the jobs that would have been done by the young people you describe who've been tempted down a different path instead. The more we discuss this, and regardless of where we sit on the B word, although it's increasingly hard to sit anywhere else from where I sit on it, I imagine, however stubborn you might find the thought process, if you turn off a tap, all you can do with the water that you've got is move it around. Unless you turn the tap back on again, there is no more water. Oh, we've got a shortage of water at this end of the bath. Right, fine. I'm just going to slush up some water from this end of the bath. Well, now we've got a shortage of water at this end of the bath. Yeah, OK, can we slush some water back in that direction, please? And yes, slush is now a word. I've invented it, and you're welcome to use it to your heart's content in your daily life. And now we've got a shortage in the sink next door. Right, well, I'm just going to get a cup, and I'm going to lift some of the water out of the bath. I'm going to slush it into the sink over there. We've got a shortage downstairs now in the dishwasher. OK, well, I'm going to get the water out of the bath that I haven't already put in the sink, and I'm going to... And eventually you've got next to no water in all the places where you need water, but until you turn the tap back on, there is going to be a shortage of water. And that's the end of my TED Talk. It's 12:51. I don't know whether it's my algorithm is responding to what I'm saying on the radio this morning, but my inbox is filling... Oh, Darren Adam has just retweeted this, I noticed. Crazy Brexit has caused us £300,000 in lost sales. I guess this week we might do a topic on when will all the people who told you it was a good idea stop pretending that all of this stuff isn't happening. £7.5 billion a year in customs declarations. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the head of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. 100,000 pigs facing unnecessary slaughter. But the British media was obsessed about an alpaca last week. I could and frequently do go on. And the problem is, of course, what makes it very hard for the media to cover properly is this idea that it was unpredicted or unexpected. It was all there, triggering Article 50 without doing any preparatory work, setting those ludicrous red lines of a hard Brexit, rejecting the European Union's offer of a 4-year transition period and going for an 11-month one instead, and then refusing to extend it after the pandemic kicked in. They were all choices taken by elected politicians. All of them. And that's the problem with this a real stretch of a silver lining. I want the average worker in this country to get paid more, and when I see how much is drawn out of a business by shareholders chiefly or chief execs in FTSE 100 companies, you know there's more money available. The imbalance over the last 30 years has been quite huge. The shift of wages from the workforce to the upper echelons of management has been spectacular. So you know it's possible to redistribute it back down a bit. And that would be perhaps a benefit of reducing the labour supply. Perhaps it would, I'm not sure. But that would rely upon really difficult political decisions and really strong, clear leadership. For example, here, to fix it, James, for a start, sort out childcare. I'm a care manager. I do not pay a pittance, but as you say, I can't get staff because the childcare arrangement's not being good enough. We need to rethink this element, and in doing so, we could allow many people back into work. Who are you going to trust to provide a root and branch transformation of childcare issues? You see the problem? Who are you going to trust to train up a new generation, a new cohort of HGV drivers safely? Who are you going to who's going to do it? Who's going to provide the political clarity and leadership to grasp this Brexity nettle and try to turn it into something positive? Who's going to do that? Where's the clarity and leadership going to come from? Yeah, exactly. 12:54 is the time. David's in Islington. David, what can you tell me?
Hi, James. Nice to talk to you for the first time.
Hello.
I've been in and around hospitality for over 30 years. Hospitality, the mess it's in is not because of Brexit or, to a larger extent, COVID. It's always been a mess. Always been a mess. And I can say that from those years of experience.
It's the same with haulage, to be clear. What's happened is that a holding pattern has been broken. So haulage shortages have been in place for 20 years, but that they've now gone over the cliff edge. There's so many shortages now that you've got these, and those new problems are caused by Brexit and to a lesser extent COVID. But the idea that everything was hunky-dory 5 years ago is patently ridiculous.
Yeah, before we left the EU, 1 in 4 job vacancies for a skilled worker was a chef position.
Yes.
Forget your waiters, front of house, KPs, any of those. It was a chef position.
Right.
1 in 4, which is just staggering.
Why?
Now,
I'm being a bit thick. Why is that staggering? You mean there was such a shortage of chefs?
Yeah,
Right,
there was
fine.
a shortage of chefs.
Okay.
But I do both permanent and temporary staff. So let's say pre-COVID, if the temp chef was getting 15 quid an hour, he was doing all right.
Right.
The same chef, skill set hasn't changed, they're now demanding 20, 25 quid an hour. I know of one chef who made a flippant comment that earned him an extra £10 an hour and is now billing $3,000 a week. There is no way that business can maintain that.
Is it Gordon Ramsay?
No. No.
Well, and okay. Well, here's the thing, because I, as a cliched old lefty, champagne socialist, I say, good. I want to see them paid a lot more money. You tell me why that's not a valid response.
Right. Okay. Well, here's the thing. When you go and eat out,
yes.
Here's the rough breakdown of the price you pay. So, 30% is normally about staff wage costs.
Right.
Then you've got food costs, 25-30%. VAT currently is 5%, but is normally 20%. But that's going to go up in October.
True.
Now, you may have noticed when the hospitality had its VAT cut, which they've been campaigning for 10 years, not that many prices went down.
Right.
UK hospitality will tell you 75% of companies did it. It's not strictly true. A lot of independents couldn't afford to do it because of the measures of COVID that they had to fund from somewhere.
So when they had Paul, wasn't it, really?
Yeah. So VAT will go up in October, so will prices. The public has to understand the cost of food, principally.
That's
but when
up.
you eat out, whether it's McDonald's or you're eating at one of Gordon's restaurants, it doesn't matter. You have to understand the cost of food and what it costs to put food in front of the customer. And I'm trying to recruit for some big roles. I mean, a really big role in the Northwest. And I've had candidates say, no, I'm not interested because I view recruiting for that not that particular kitchen, but a kitchen, as I will always be short-staffed.
So the job is not worth the hassle because of the shortages further down the chain. We're going to run out of time, and I want to benefit from your expertise. What fixes it then?
Hospitality needs to start from scratch.
Well, we can't.
Years ago,
we can't. So what are we going to do? I mean, what if I just want to get over the line till Christmas?
Yeah, forget that.
And what about when furlough ends? Is that going to be good news for you at the end of this month when furlough comes to an end?
No, it's not going to make that much difference, I don't think, for hospitality, because the guys that have already left are driving for courier companies. I'll give you an example of this. I've got a friend
Quickly, we've got a minute. Magid's itching to get behind the microphone.
Michelin-star-trained pastry chef.
Right.
And he will be earning £1,000 a week at the moment.
Okay.
He's earning 800 quid a week driving for DPD. He has every night off, every weekend off. Hospitality can't compete with that.
God, I hadn't thought of that. Gosh. So that's going in the other direction.
Yeah.
Well, you live and learn. So, scale of 1 to 10, how bad is... I mean, I never ask this question, but I think you'll play the game, David. A scale of 1 to 10, how bad is it now in your sector?
It's as bad as it's going to get. I can't see it getting worse, to be honest.
Well, so I guess
prices are going to have to go up, and that's the bottom line of it, and the customers are just going to have to accept that.
And that's fine if their wages go up as well, but they're not going to unless they're in one of the sectors where there are shortages. So best case scenario, we have sectors in every single shortage and everybody's wages go up. Even I would probably chalk that one up as a tangible benefit, but you're more likely to see pigs flying than you are to see that land anytime soon. And of course, the pigs can't fly if 100,000 of them have been slaughtered as a direct consequence of Brexit shortages. All roads. David, thank you. That's it from me for another day. You are listening to LBC, where the next voice you will hear belongs to Majid Nouaz.